Thank you, everybody. I've been asked to do an upbeat talk to get you in the mood for B-Side Lancashire, to do something thematically relevant for the talk that'll get everybody ready to go. And I noticed today there's a number of talks on artificial intelligence. I thought I'll give you my opinion about artificial intelligence, and I'll be as upbeat as I can about this topic. So that's how it's going. I also noticed something during the introduction, that there's going to be a session with the recruiters who were described as being fenced off. So that was something I noted. But no, I'm going to talk a little bit about AI. I've only got 20 minutes, and I'm going to basically do what I do for all of my talks, for anyone who's seen me talk before. I'm going to rant about things that people have said to me recently that has annoyed me. So here we go. And I did want to, mainly because it's a bit of a cop-out, and mainly because it's thematically relevant, get GPT-4 to write this entire presentation for me. But as you heard, it's not that good, is it? So it is useful in several ways, and I'll give some examples of what it's useful. But I did put into GPT-4, who is Holly Grace Williams? And I was amazed by the first line of output that effectively started, Holly Grace Williams is a British cybersecurity researcher, and I was like, whoa, AI knows who I am, what the hell? And it says, specializing in the theatre of threat intelligence. And I was like, not quite, I'm a pen tester. And then as it went down, it just started giving me accolades that I didn't win or earn in any way. So it said I was one of Forbes 30 under 30, and a small part of me went, was I? And I had to check. And I wasn't. So that is the theme of what I'm talking about here. It's not getting it better, but it's not getting it worse. What I'm talking about is things like AI are useful tools. I'll give you some examples of how I use them in my work to hopefully inspire some people to play around with these things. But yeah, I saw a meme, I don't know if it was an XKCD or something, it was a comic on Twitter that were talking about how somebody had a one-line email to send, but they used ChatGPT to pad it out a bit. And they sent it to somebody who didn't want to read all of that text, so gave it to GPT-4 to summarize. And yeah, so there's some good uses, but it's not great. For those of you who haven't seen me talk before and don't understand that, no, I'm not in the Forbes 30 under 30. My name's Holly Grace Williams. I'm a penetration tester. I break into computers for a living. And we talk a little bit about pen testing stuff and how AI impacts that. But one of the funny things that has actually changed recently is a few years ago, it was not uncommon for people to say, not this exact phrase, but, do you think AI is going to take you out of a job? And this might seem a bit silly now to people here, but I have been on panels that have been recorded where this essentially was one of the questions. Do you think AI will put you out of a job within the next 5 years? Which is fascinating to me, because very recently we've had some very public AI platforms who've massively jumped forward the capability of just off-the-shelf AI. And people have stopped saying this to me. So that's unusual. But do I think AI will put me out of a job soon? Well, I've prepared a presentation for you using AI. And what I've done is I've taken the slides that I've put together and replaced them all with AI-generated slides, or at least the images that are AI-generated. So we'll see how that goes. Some people might know that Akimbo Core, my company's mascot, is a pangolin. You might not know that AI, this is DALL-E 2 that we're using for this, only has a very tangential understanding of what a pangolin is. So when we asked it to generate a mascot for us, this is the best that it did. I think it took me 15 or so goes with DALL-E to get it to something where I'm like, that's a pretty good image, I can take that. It started at Eldritch Horror, where, I don't know, maybe people have seen, one of the ways at the moment, no doubt they'll train this out, of detecting if an image is AI generated or not. AI is not very good at generating hands. So if you see, for example, there's a photograph put online saying Elon Musk has been hanging around with AOC and, oh, look at this, isn't this interesting? And if you look at them supposedly holding hands, well, there's far too many fingers involved. One of them's got at least 7 fingers. And at the moment, that's a quick way of detecting AI images. It's not very good at generating jewelry. It's not very good at generating hands and those kinds of things. Or pangolins. They were terrifying. but don't worry. So I wanted to do a talk about how AI is going to impact my career and answer that question of, will AI put me out of a job in the next few years? So I asked AI, how will AI affect the field of penetration testing in the next years? And it said, AI developments will have a significant impact on the field of penetration testing being the practice of testing computer systems, networks, applications to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hackers. And AI will change the way that penetration testing is done in several ways. Automating some tasks, enhancing testing capability, increasing efficiency, and changing the skill set required. I was like, it's quite a good answer, but it also strikes me as 4 paragraphs of not really saying a lot. It's like, how will AI change things? Well, things will change with AI. So it did come up with the kind of answer that I was going for. And I do think it's true that AI will enhance testing capabilities and it'll automate some tasks. Do I think AI is going to replace me? No. I'm going to answer that in a couple of ways. I'm going to talk in a second about the creativity of pen testing and how awesome I am as a pen tester and how no artificial system could ever achieve this. But also I'm going to talk a little bit about just like the realistic side of cybersecurity. And sometimes when we come to events like this, our impression of where our industry is as a whole is maybe distorted a little bit because there's going to be some very intelligent students giving some very high-level talks, some very good detailed talks on what's coming next. And what I actually deal with day to day is a little bit different. So, some of you might have heard of a vulnerability called SQL injection, which I've put down here as like first released on Christmas Day of 1998 in FRAC magazine number 65. It's not really, of course, for somebody to write an easy article about a vulnerability, it must be known about already. It's been around since about 1998, making it like a 25-year-old vulnerability, or do the maths in your head, Holly, in front of a crowd. It's an old vulnerability. And I want to say it's a high-impact vulnerability because the vulnerability that led to the TalkTalk breach, that's the one that everybody goes to. I actually think the hack against the Illinois State Board of Elections in 2016 is a better example, but we do like laughing at companies when they get breached. So TalkTalk's the one on the slide. Point being, ancient vulnerability. I can tell by looking at some of you in this room, this vulnerability is older than you. When was the last time I found SQL injection on a pen test? Friday. So, yes, AI is going to be fantastic, and we've already seen some tooling coming out, in particular on the defensive side of things, looking at things that machine learning is good at, anomaly detection, those kind of things. Just pointing out stuff like, hey, this is weird. This user did a weird thing that this user doesn't usually do. Can a human look at this? Anomaly detection on the defensive side of things, AI is really good. But if you think that pen testers are going to be out of a job soon, no, we're not. Because, of course, even though this tooling is available, even though it's very accessible at the moment, there's still an awful lot of companies out there struggling for whatever reason. Be it a lack of resources, be it a lack of team size, not enough people, not enough money, what have you. We're not as far along as an industry as we think we are, or I wouldn't have to keep writing the same pen test report about SQL injection. To be clear, for those who are thinking about getting into pen testing, thinking, oh man, I get to develop AI systems, that's really cool, and then you see this slide and go, it's still just SQL injection? I'm not saying that I find it a lot, I'm not saying that I find it very often, but I do occasionally find it, and it just so happened that I found it on Friday, which is very funny to me. So for me, what is AI and how is it going to impact these things, and where do I use it as a pen test? Well, really, it's just new tooling, and it's going to help us start building additional capabilities, and as ChatGPT said, enhancing some testing capabilities and automating some tasks. It's a really humble way for the AI to describe itself, but I'll give you a couple of examples in a second as to how I've used it. One more rant, though, before I get onto that. And this is the way that we talk about information security in general. I did tell you this presentation would be made up of things that people have said to me that annoys me. So here's the second of those. I very often hear people say things like, oh God, the word's back. The pangolin terrifies me. The chain is only as strong as the weakest link. What we're often talking about here is this idea on the defensive side of things that if there's any individual system that is flawed or whatever, there can be a problem with that. But one of the developments recently, we're starting to see people talk about the attack chain. We're starting to see people talk about the stages that pen testers or cyber criminals go through when delivering a penetration test. And broadly, they're all the same. I'll put up some examples in a second. But one of the things that frustrates me is how organizations often talk about breaches and things like that as if it was a single event. I keep hearing people say things like a ransomware attack. I'm quite vocal in the fact that I don't think there's such a thing as a ransomware attack. Ransomware is a payload. If you think about the stages that I go through on a pen test, and where I have written at the bottom, capture the flag, if you want to change this to the stages that a cyber criminal goes through instead, just change where it says capture the flag to money laundering. And then it's roughly the same. or destroy the evidence or whatever you want to finish with. But you go through these stages, and this is a pretty typical pen test for me. This is the infrastructure side of tests. So if I'm going to plug into a network and see how far I can get, or if I'm going to compromise an end-user device through a phishing attack or something and see how far I can get. And I'm going to go through general stages like network mapping, compromising user accounts, privilege escalation, network propagation, those kinds of things. And to change it from these kind of high-level titles to an example of the kind of thing that I do, these are generally the stages that I would go through for what I would describe as baby's first pen test. So this is like if a company don't have vulnerability scanning, don't have vulnerability management, those kinds of things, they're just like, well, we're big enough now that we think we should have a pen test. Can you come in and hack us? I'm going to hack them in exactly 3 minutes, and I'm going to use it using Responder. Any of the pen testers in the room are like, yeah, you click go and it hacks the company. It's brilliant. But these are roughly the stages. So from an intersection attack, that could be through something like Responder, or it could be through something like ARC replay, or through like a IPv6 routing attack or something like that. Capture some credentials, usually through something like NTLM, that's file transfer on Windows. I'll probably find bad implementation of the principle of least privilege, so users probably have administrative privileges somewhere. Very often, for example, I see web developers have local admin of their own machine so they can install tools, or local admin of the dev service, those kind of things. You've probably got reused local admin passwords, or propagate across the network, find a domain admin who's logged in who shouldn't be, steal their token, I'm a domain admin. So we go through these stages with companies, and what I like to do is present in the report, these are the stages that I've gone through, and these are effectively the places in which you can slow me down or stop me. So when it comes to things like name resolution spoofing and those kinds of things, hey, turn off multicast name resolution. We could go through each step of this. There'll be something that you can do. Hey, I'm doing SMB relay attacks. That's the second line here. You should turn on SMB signing. And what I'm trying to do is implement this idea of like defense in depth, right? This is the stuff that I did, and here's at every stage a way that you could have either prevented me, slowed me down, or increased your detection. And I show this to a customer in a fancy pen test report that I've written for them, and they go, oh, damn users, picking weak passwords. You cracked a password hash, didn't you? Oh, God, what was it? Was it finance1 with a capital F? Yeah, it was actually. Oh, it's all the user's fault. This might surprise some people if you don't play around directly with pen testing and those kinds of things. Very often when they talk about weak passwords, like, surely we've solved weak passwords with like multi-factor authentication and long password lengths and guidance on 3 random words and things like that. And again, you have, just like SQL injection, I'm not saying every user on the network has a weak password, but I find it pretty much every time. Someone, somewhere will have a weak password. I mentioned at the beginning, actually, as the founding team were talking at the front. Last week, I hacked a CCTV system in a lecture theatre like this, but a private one in a conference space. Admin, because of course it was. And the reason I was reminded of that is, just before I started my talk, I had a little bit of nervous energy, and I'm like dancing at the front, like getting ready to give my talk. And that was what I saw when I logged into their remote access, the recording of previous talks, as another speaker before dancing. So yeah, we still see weak passwords and stuff like that. So one of the things that I'm getting at here is, of course, you think we need AI when I'm still hacking FTSE 250s with finance1 with a capital F. I don't think it was a FTSE 250, but they measure their revenue in billions, so it's a big company that I hacked. And, of course, the point that when I show you a methodology like this, it's not one thing, there's a series of things. Don't think about security as, oh, we just need to break this chain in the attack chain. Because if I don't get all the way to domain admin, and I just get that low privilege user or something like that, if I just crack a finance user or something, probably a whole bunch of awful stuff that I can do to your network. Pen testing shouldn't be getting to domain admin, even though most pen testers do that, then feel like we're finished. It's demonstrating impact to the organization, and generally, you don't need to go the whole way through the chain to do that. Another thing is, very often, reports are written, and those reports are very good at sharing information that might be useful to organizations and protecting themselves. But sometimes that data can be misinterpreted. So this is from the Verizon Breach Report 2022, which I've terribly not cited on this slide, the Verizon Data Breach Report 2022. And it says the human element continues to drive data breaches. This year, 82% of breaches involve the human element. And it gives examples of what they mean by that: use of stolen credentials, phishing, misuse, or simple error. That could be, I was looking at some healthcare breaches, which were just basically staff members in the NHS sending files to the wrong person and stuff like that. Still a data breach, still a human-involved data breach. Somebody made a mistake. And I think the problem with this is, very often we hyper-focus on this, and we go, if we can just solve passwords, because these people keep choosing weak passwords. But it's not actually, in my interpretation, what this statistic is saying. It's saying the breach involved credentials, right? So we stole credentials, cracked credentials. It's not saying the whole thing happened because that guy picked a bad password. It was one aspect of the attack chain. So when we think about networks and those kinds of things, we need to think about breaking the attack chain at every step, not just one of those things. And then finally, when we think about, as security testers, as penetration testers, how can we implement AI into these things? We shouldn't be thinking about, how do I write a GPT-4 that is just a pen tester? Is it just like, get the chatbot and then hook Nmap into it or something like that? It doesn't have to be. It could be, throughout this methodology, these steps that we take that I've talked about throughout this presentation, where can I increase automation? And that's it. And very often when I talk about automation within security testing, people look down on it. And I think some of this does come from pen testers trying to increase their job security, where we say things like, hey, can we use more automation in pen testing? And then you'll hear a pen tester talk about how vulnerability scanners are nowhere near as good as humans and things like that because they can't contextualize vulnerabilities. They probably can't chain vulnerabilities and those kinds of things. And that's true, but automation is bigger as a field than just click go in a scanner. So, for example, not an AI example, but just an example of where we use automation, brute forcing passwords. Do you think when I'm brute forcing passwords, when I guessed that admin, I sat at the login box and typed admin, password? No. Admin, password 1? No. I automated it, of course I did. And so when we're looking at automation, that can be many, many different things throughout the process. One of the things that we're working on at the moment at Akimbo is automating interacting with your vulnerability information. So we want our vulnerability management platform to have natural language processing so you can ask our platform about your vulnerability data. So you can log into the platform and go, have any more high-impact vulnerabilities been found? And for the platform to be able to answer that question for you. Can you show me a graph of the missing patches in our system? That's the kind of thing that we're working on. It's automation. It's helping people out. And also, in part, on our vulnerability management platform, when I'm doing a pen test against an organization and adding vulnerabilities to our platform, I very often realize that customers log in for about 6 seconds. And I think that's because there's a pen test going on and they're logging in to see if I found anything or not. So having a system that you can ask those specific questions about is going to be useful, and that is automation. But it's not automation to replace the whole pen tester, and it's not click and go in a vulnerability scanner. So there's a lot of ways to say that AI doesn't have to replace a human to be useful. It's just another tool in the toolbox, and we should be looking to implement that throughout. Of course, this is pen testing focused. If you're not a pen tester, whatever field you work at, break those tasks down and see where AI can benefit you. So aside from the natural language processing for asking questions about vulnerability information, I wanted to give you one more example of where we've had just really good success of just like finding a machine learning problem. Just before I give you this example, it's a very, very simple example, but we find it works really well and it scares customers, which is a weird thing to say, but very often that's kind of why they're paying us. When it comes to AI, very often people have this idea that if it's not a generalized intelligence, if it's not like as smart as one of your coworkers, at least a graduate, right? If it's not at that level, it's useless. And we hear people not saying these words, but acting and talking as if they are living these words, which is like, I won't be impressed with self-driving cars until they can drive themselves in all situations. Like, I'm not impressed by this until it's like a level 5 self-driving car system. And all I'm trying to say is just like, yeah, but that's a really big burden, and you really don't want me typing admin. Oh, I got one into a login box. Automation is great. So the example that I mentioned that we've had success with recently is doing a targeted breach assessment of an organization. It's like a mini red team where we're just focusing on technical attacks. And one of the things that I managed to access, as I mentioned a second ago, I got access to a member of the finance team, or I assume they were from their group membership. And so they're in a group called finance users, and their password was something like finance1 with a capital F. And I have internal network access. And it's like, what do I do next? And from the pen tester methodology side of things, I'm going to be looking at those technical attacks in terms of, can I propagate across the network? Can I find remote code execution vulnerabilities? Let's spin up Metasploit, because that takes a while to load. And kind of that's where my brain is focused. But one of the things I could do as a separate task, or just on another tab in my console, is I can supply these credentials to a machine learning interface that just says, hey, just go and find me PII. Because that's a very machine learning kind of task. Here is a file called scan number 1. It's a PDF. I don't know what's in it. And a machine learning algorithm can scan over that very quickly and go, that's a passport, that's a driving license, that's a birth certificate, those kind of things. And many of these, like, finding common documents that are PII, in particular birth certificates, is surprisingly easy. It can just be image recognition of just like all passports kind of look the same, all birth certificates kind of look the same. They've also got really weird terminology on them. There's superintendent, something like that. Superintendent is one of the words on the bottom of birth certificates. It's not a word I use very often, but if a document includes that word, it may well be a birth certificate. So what we're able to do is I can focus my human brain, my creativity on finding all of these complex technical vulnerabilities, and then I click back to the other tab, which is my machine learning tool just scanning network shares for what this finance user can access. We found 500,000 files that contain PII, just like randomly spread across the network. Because I know we're all really into like data mapping and GDPR and keeping files where they should be. A lot of users out there aren't. We found an open file share that was just a scanner. Every time you scan a document, it just puts it on a file share for your convenience. So it has every file they've scanned for the last 8 years just in an open file share. When I say open file share, I mean available to any domain user. So you technically have to log in, but I mentioned that we cracked that user password. It's not like just on the internet kind of thing, but it's still pretty bad. And they're just like, yeah, people have them on their desktop. People have them in their My Documents. All of the file shares that we can access, we rattle through very, very quickly. I mean, when I say quickly, it took the scan a couple of hours, but quickly in the sense that it involved no input from me. It was fully automated. So that is a really big rant to basically say that AI is great. We haven't got self-driving cars yet that can do everything, but we can automate an awful lot of the work that we do. So it's not getting any better, but it's not getting any worse. Thank you.
The legend that is Holly Grace Williams. Big round of applause again, please.